and she's going to talk about QuickBooks customized for ad specialty distributors. Harriet owned an advertising specialty distributorship for 23 years. She sold her business and now brings her years of industry experience to provide QuickBooks accounting services to ad specialty distributors. Let me also just briefly note, please hold all your questions for towards the end of the presentation. They can be typed into the questions or chat panes on the webinar side window, and we will go through each type question in order in the end. Thank you for your patience, and without further ado, welcome, Harriet.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, everybody. My name is Harriet Gatter. I'm the owner of Accounting Support, LLC. Well, now, why is this not working? Wait a minute. Let's try that. There we go. For 23 years, I owned and ran presidential promotions and advertising specialty distributorship outside of Philadelphia. And like most of you, I was the chief cook and bottle washer, doing everything, including my own accounting and QuickBooks. Over the years, I found that in addition to dealing with my wonderful clients, I always looked forward to doing my accounting work in the business. I know I am weird. I really do love numbers. I even taught accounting as an adjunct professor outside of Philadelphia for a while. In 2008, my husband and I moved from Philadelphia to Charlotte, North Carolina, closer to but not quite back to my home of Charleston, South Carolina, and not far from where my husband and I met in college at Wake Forest University. I found that serving my base clients in Philly from Charlotte became more difficult, and I made the decision to sell my company and make the switch within the ad specialty arena from distributor to accountant, doing for my clients what I had done for myself for 23 years. So now with my company of accounting support, I work with ad specialty distributors. I work remotely through LogMeIn, helping them with their QuickBooks needs. I became certified as a QuickBooks Pro advisor and bring 23 years of experience in the industry to my clients. I've also worked unofficially with Sage Online to work with their order management integration with QuickBooks, and have acted as a beta tester for Sage with the recently released Sage Online 10.0, which, by the way, is pretty cool. So now that you know a little bit about me, let's launch into the ever-exciting world of QuickBooks for the ad specialty distributor and see if I can give you some information that might save you time and money. The ad specialty distributor has lots of transactions, as you know, and thus lots of accounting entries, more complicated than many businesses. When I was a distributor, I had to spend at least a day or two just processing the mail, faxes, emails. If I went on vacation for a week, my entire dining room table would be covered with order acknowledgments, invoices, flyers from suppliers, and hopefully checks from clients. It was a major endeavor. Volumes of accounting entries result in a need for a general ledger system to organize the data for accounting purposes. It's a huge time-saving and efficiency feature if your general ledger system also acts as your order management system, or if you have an order management system that interfaces with your general ledger. It avoids duplication of entry, it saves time, and thus greatly reduces chance of error. QuickBooks is the most used accounting software for small to medium-sized businesses. It handles your general ledger needs as well as order management. Also, since it's so widely used, your CPA is probably well-versed in it, thus minimizing your CPA bills. QuickBooks users don't have to have an accounting background because QuickBooks uses icons for functions such as create invoices or write checks. You, the business owner, do not have to know what the actual debits and credits are behind the activity, but QuickBooks does know and creates your financial statements for you. And then today we're going to go through QuickBooks Premier versus Pro. We're going to go over some of the three major lists: customer, vendor, and item list. I'm going to show you how to save some time with sales tax. I'm going to do a sample order, show you a little bit about templates, and do an order for one customer that involves 2 suppliers, and then we'll have some questions after that. QuickBooks Pro and Premier are designed for companies that have fewer than 20 employees and annual sales less than $1 million. I've used QuickBooks Premier for my ad specialty distributorship since 2005. I chose QuickBooks Premier because it allowed me to produce the 4 steps for my order processing: estimates, sales orders to send to my client for their approval, purchase orders to send to the supplier, and client invoices. QuickBooks Premier and Pro are very similar except for 2 key features. Premier has additions that are industry specific, whereas Pro does not. There is a manufacturing and wholesale edition of Premier that suits our industry very well. Previously, you had to purchase a specific industry edition when purchasing Premier, but now you just specify which edition when you are setting up Premier. So you just buy Premier, and then you get to answer the question and choose manufacturing and wholesale. Gearing the program to a particular industry allows for a chart of accounts and industry-specific report options. The biggest drawback for me for Pro is that QuickBooks Pro does not have the ability to create a sales order to send to your customer. I was always fanatical about my orders. That's why I'm in accounting, and I created a sales order for each and every order. I required that a client sign off on every order with product and imprint instructions detailed, as well as a copy of the art. Often this avoided an error in advance. It was also substantiation if a client had signed a sales order, heaven forbid, without taking the time to think about it or read it carefully. And so I had a recourse when I got a call that started with, "That's not what I thought this was going to look like." Having a sales order allows you to print only information that you want your client to see, such as the prices you are charging them, and you can hide information you may not want them to see, such as the supplier and the product number. In QuickBooks Pro, as well as Premier, you can produce estimates. And you can actually customize an estimate to look like a sales order in Pro to have it serve double duty, but it can be time-consuming and involve a fairly high level of knowledge of QuickBooks and templates in order to produce that, the sales order in the place of the estimate. QuickBooks Pro and Premier are very reasonable for the workhorses that they are. On Staples this past week, QuickBooks Pro was listed at $299 and some change, but on sale for $199.99. And Premier was listed at $399 and change, on sale for $299.99. In any case, Premier is generally $100 more than Pro, and you might want to consider Premier the next time you upgrade your QuickBooks software for the additional features it gives you for the ad specialty industry. If it saves you 5 minutes an order on each order, or keeps an error from happening, how much is that worth to you? Now, we are going to go to the home page for QuickBooks. This is all in Premier. And it gives us a flow chart of the orders and the icons for the commands. We start here with estimates. We go to sales orders, purchase orders, and from the sales order or the estimate, we can create invoices. The customer, vendor, and item lists can be accessed from up here. Customers, vendors, and the item list is under the lists. You can also go to customers and vendors over here, although the lists are not accessible from that side. QuickBooks generally gives you multiple options for functions, which is great, but I think everyone figures out what works for them and what's familiar to them, and they stick with it. I happen to use the commands at the ribbon on the top. Now, the building blocks of an order in QuickBooks are the lists, but the visible documents of an order that you produce are the estimate, which is optional, sales order, purchase order, and invoice. In QuickBooks, you don't have to re-enter information once it is entered. There are lists that are created whose data repopulates the sales and purchase order and invoice when the information is used again. These lists are the building blocks on which QuickBooks is built. The primary building block lists are the customer list, the vendor list, and the item list. There are quite a few other lists that help avoid replication of effort, but these are the major three that we're going to discuss today, with some tips on how to make your life easier. You can enter data in these lists prior to starting a purchase order, or you can wait to be prompted to create these in the sales and purchase order and invoice screens. For simplicity's sake, today, I'm going to look at these lists as standalone lists. So we're going to go through the customer, the vendor, and the item list separate from the purchase order right now. So now here, this screen that we're looking at now is the entrance screen for the customer. The customer list allows you to enter pertinent data for each of your customers. You get to put in the bill and a ship to address, which is nice if they are different, as they sometimes are. Contact information, email, website, however much you might want to do. You can run numerous reports on your customers, and it allows you to have the information at the click of your keyboard. So we're creating ABC Company. They're located right outside of Philadelphia. My distributorship was outside of Philadelphia, so I'm using Pennsylvania by way of example for sales tax and everything else in the examples that I'm doing today. Now, there's another aspect to the customer list that's very important. It's the sales tax settings over here on the left-hand side. So we're going to click Sales Tax Settings. And it's going to take us to this screen, which is innocuous looking, but it's a lot of data you have to enter here, or at least a lot of thinking you have to do. Here you enter how this customer is taxed for sales tax purposes. First, you're going to come to the sales tax code. Are the sales to this company, to ABC Company, generally taxable or non-taxable? And this is a separate issue entirely from whether or not they sometimes or even all the time purchase non-taxable items, as that will be handled within the individual items. If this customer is expected to pay sales tax for their purchases, their tax code is tax, as it's listed here. If they are a nonprofit who is not subject to sales tax, or a reseller who collects sales taxes on their sales, then their tax code is non for non-taxable sale. And you would just click this drop-down box, and your two options in here would be tax or non. Once you determine the tax code, then you need to enter the tax item. The first time you do this, this will prompt you to create an item for each different type of sales tax. Now let's say that ABC Company, our customer up here, we are going to be creating, this ABC Company is only subject to Pennsylvania tax, which is 6%. There are no other county or city taxes that apply to ABC Company. So I'm going to go to the tax item and click on the drop-down box, which would be here. And if I had not created PA sales tax, then I would have to go, it would say Add New, and I would go here. So here I'm going to create a sales tax item. There's a drop-down box here. You get choices for different types of items. I'm going to call it PA sales tax. I'm just going to describe it as Pennsylvania sales tax. These descriptions are up to you, but just make sure when you name them you know exactly what they are, because you'll have PA sales tax, and then you might have PA exempt tax. Whatever, just so you know what you've named it and be consistent. The tax rate I'm going to enter is 6%. The tax agency, the one to whom we pay sales tax, is the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue. You click OK up here. All sales to this customer of items that are subject to sales tax will have a 6% sales tax added to the customer invoice. This is the simplest of situations, and it can get a little bit more complicated. Now, I want to make my life as simple as possible, and I want to minimize the manual workarounds I have to do. What if I have a client, such as Ben Franklin Company, that is located in Philadelphia? Now, Philadelphia is a pretty greedy city. In addition to the 6% owed to the state in sales tax, the City of Philadelphia wants an additional 2% in sales tax collected for it. Now, how am I going to handle this to make my life the easiest possible? I could enter the 8% for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania combined, which would cover the total, but when I go to file my Pennsylvania sales taxes, I won't have a breakout of the 6% and the 2%, and I have to include the breakout when I file my taxes. That seems like a pain. That's at least an hour or two wasted every time I have to file sales tax. So I have an idea. I'm going to go create another sales tax item, just like the 6% one for Pennsylvania we did before, only this is just the 2% for Philadelphia. And I'm going to call it Philadelphia sales tax. It's a sales tax item, as was the one for Pennsylvania. And I'm going to enter 2%. Here again, we're paying Pennsylvania Department of Revenue. This will break out the 6% owed to Pennsylvania and the 2% owed to Philly. But wait a minute, I have a problem. I can only enter one sales tax item for a customer. What if I could combine the 6% for Pennsylvania and the 2% for Philly for one customer in a group, but call it one name, such as Philadelphia/Pennsylvania sales tax? So instead of a sales tax item, which we created before, I'm going to create a sales tax group, which is an option in the drop-down box. And I'm going to combine the two sales tax items that I already created, calling it Philadelphia/Pennsylvania sales tax. And when I go to create the group, it gives me options. So there's a drop-down box that would show here, and I chose Pennsylvania sales tax of 6%, and I've chosen Philadelphia sales tax of 2% for a total of 8%. So now I go back to the Ben Franklin Company, who's in Philadelphia, and I enter my Philadelphia PA sales tax as their tax item. All taxable sales for Ben Franklin Company will be subject to 8% sales tax, this group sales tax we created, but my sales tax report will show 6% to Pennsylvania and 2% to Philadelphia. I just spent 2 minutes doing something that will save me hours and hours. Genius. Now, for future reference for the rest of y'all, this can be applied to more than 2 types of sales tax as well. I spoke to a client who collects sales taxes from clients who are subject to sales taxes for state, county, and city. You can set up each of these 3 and create a group with them, just as we did with Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. So now we're going to go to the vendor list. And as with all the other lists, once you enter the vendors, their information will pop up again when you do another order with them. The information's pretty basic, and you can enter as much or as little as you need. I chose Superb Case, which has for years and years been one of my favorite suppliers. and I have their address information here. I could put all their contact information. But now if I go to additional information here, there's a little bit of an interesting twist. Custom fields. You'll see that I've added Sage number. I've added this field to my purchase order template as well, so that the Sage number of the supplier is printed on the PO. Of course, you can just as easily add ASI number or anything else you like or might find helpful. I always added the supplier's ASI number. I was an ASI distributor, just in case I picked up the address or whatever of the wrong supplier. As you know, there are many similar supplier names, particularly those beginning with add, and I always wanted to make sure I had the supplier I intended. The likelihood that two suppliers with similar names would have identical item numbers is highly unlikely, but I have seen stranger things happen in my life. Also, if I sent a PO to the wrong supplier, it would probably be discarded or ignored, and I wouldn't know I had a problem. I'm hoping this just adds a little bit of reinforcement if someone got the wrong PO. So you just go down here, you do define fields, you type in what you want the field to be, and this becomes a data field, and it is available to be put on templates, which we will get to in just a little bit. Now we've done customers and vendor list, and we're going to go to the item list. We worked with items a little bit when we entered the sales tax information for a customer. Now we're going to look at items as products, line items that you would find on your purchase orders or invoices. Here again, once this data is entered, it comes up again when you order that product. There's no duplication of effort. And here's the screen to create an item. In our industry, for the most part, we order products for our clients, which are then produced and shipped directly to the client. We do not generally take possession of the products. Thus, we don't inventory products. I know some distributors do, but I think that's the very small minority. And today we're going to talk about distributors that do not inventory products. When we set up an item, we have to determine which type of item it is. When you create an item in a company that does not hold inventory, the item type should be non-inventory part. This is really important because if you forget and make it an inventory item or inventory part, it's going to mess up your financial statements big time. You also need to check this little box down here that says this item is used in assemblies or is purchased for a specific customer job. Check this box. Before you check it, if it were unchecked, you would just see the sales information side. By checking this box, you see the purchase information side. So it allows you to enter both the purchase and sales information and accounts to which these flow. In a sale, your expense account, that which you pay to your supplier, will most often be cost of goods sold. So here we are on the purchase information side, have the description of the item. We have the item number up here. We have the description of the item, and for the supplier cost, it will go into cost of goods sold. Your income account will be your sales account over here on the sales information side. If you happen to track your sales by categories, such as sales clothing, sales desk items, sales bags, whatever, here's where you can enter the specific sales sub-account to track these subcategories. This is unlikely, but let's just say you had a category under sales for sales of key rings. So it would be a sub-account of sales, but it would have its own account number, and you could put that here for creating this item for this key ring. When setting up an item, you can also enter the preferred vendor down here. if you like. For instance, Superb Case is the supplier of the 664 keyrings. In this case, Superb Case is the only supplier with this keyring with this item number. So I have chosen to enter preferred vendor. You also need to specify a tax code for each item. If the item is generally subject to sales tax, you enter tax. If it is generally not subject to sales tax, enter non, which is the other option, non, N-O-N, is the other option on the drop-down box for tax code. For example, if you operate your business in Pennsylvania, keyrings would be taxable, so the tax code would be tax. On the other hand, in Pennsylvania, clothing is tax exempt, so the tax code for clothing would be non. If you were in Delaware, I don't think they're subject to sales tax for anything, so all of their items would be non. Now I'm going to create an item for two other types of line items on a purchase order. The next one is screen charge. You could create this item as a service type up here instead of non-inventory part, which probably would be a little bit more accurate, but I don't think it causes a problem if you just make it non-inventory part for simplicity's sake, as long as you remember to make them non-inventory. Here you also check the box for this item is used in assemblies or is purchased for a specific customer job. I put the description of the item. Back on the other screen we put 664, which was the item number. I put the description here, and I have cost of goods sold for my expense account, as we did with the key rings, and I have sales for my income account, as we did with the key rings. I made screen charge taxable. Every now and again, if you have an order that's not taxable, it's non, which you would have to adjust on an individual purchase order, but for the most part it will be taxable. Notice I do not have a preferred vendor here because screen charges can be used by any number of suppliers. It's kind of a generic. So I just leave the preferred vendor box empty in this case. Now, by way of example, I'm going to show you one more item, shipping. Here again, the item type is non-inventory part. We could have made it service again if we wanted to. The item number or just name is shipping. The description I've just embellished a little bit. I've checked this box again, which gives me both sides of the purchase and the sales information. I have not included a preferred vendor because shipping is pretty generic and it applies to all vendors. But notice I don't have cost of goods sold here, and I don't have sales on this side. I could have certainly done that if I wanted to, but I did it this way because I wanted to break the freight charges out of cost of goods sold in sales. I want to see it as a separate number. I don't want it just rolled into the big number of cost of goods sold or the big number of sales. And depending upon how you pay your sales rep, you may want it broken out as well. So I have the expense account as freight costs, which is set up as a cost of goods sold account in my chart of accounts. Is not a regular expense account. So on my income statement, you're going to see cost of goods sold, and then you're going to see the freight cost as a separate item, but still within the cost of goods sold portion of the income statement. And similarly, in the sales portion of your income statement, you're going to see the sales total, and then you'll see the shipping and delivery income, which is set up as an income account in the chart of accounts. Now we've learned how to set up these major lists for our orders: customer list, vendor list, and item list. And now we're going to go create an order. Yay! So we're going to creating an order from estimate through to invoice. For our sample order, ABC Company, up here, is placing an order for 100 of our friend, the 664 keyring. Now, this is an estimate screen, and you don't necessarily need to create an estimate in Premier, but I always do by force of habit. Just be consistent so you know your routine. If you always create an estimate, always create it. If you don't create it, just be consistent in your behavior. In the drop-down box for the customer job on the estimate screen, all of the customers that I have created would show on the drop-down box, and just select ABC Company. It will populate the name and address we've entered previously. Now, I always do my numbers for the estimate, sales order, purchase order, and invoice. The number for them is always the one that I have assigned to my purchase order. So in this example, for my company, this is purchase order 1300. So 1300 is a number that I've given to the estimate, and I want to carry that through all the way through estimate, sales order, purchase order, and invoice. And that way I can make sure I can follow through the whole trail. In the item column, I would go to a drop-down box. There would be a little icon there, and I would just click on it. I would type 664. The 664 keyring, which we set up earlier, will show up. Select it, and do the same thing for the screen charge and the shipping charge. If we had not set up ABC Company, item 664, screen charge, or shipping earlier, we would now be prompted when we went to that area and click the drop-down box. There'd be an option of Add New in this drop-down box, which would take us to the edit screen to create the customer or the item. Now we're going to add the number of keyrings, because this was all blank here initially, and we're going to put the price that we are going to charge our customer right here. For the screen charge and shipping, you don't have to put a quantity unless, for instance, you have more than one screen charge. If you had 2 screen charges, you'd put 2. The per screen charge cost would be $50, and the total over here that would carry forward would be $100. So we really, unless it's more than one, don't have to add a quantity here. If you recall, ABC Company that we created is subject to 6% sales tax, Pennsylvania sales tax. It's going to show up here automatically. And the 664 keyrings that we said were taxable will be included in the calculation, and the 6% sales tax is calculated here and added to the estimate, and now our estimate is complete. If, for instance, this was a non-taxable item and we wanted to make, for instance, a screen charge non-taxable, there's a drop-down box here, and you can just change whichever one's the tax status of these that you need to change. It's not a big problem. So now I want to create a sales order from my estimate. So I'm on my estimate entry screen. I'm going to go right up here where it says Create Sales Order. I'm going to click that, and I get this. And that's going to carry forward with all of the information from estimate 1300. If you see that down here, I'm going to change the sales order number to make sure it matches 1300. It should just follow sequentially, but if you end up doing something odd, it could throw your numbers off, so just make sure you always check those. So the sales order is created from the estimate, and it carries forward with the same information. And if something needs to be edited, you can change your data in here. If you didn't create an estimate, your blank sales order screen would come up, and you could just enter the data the way we did on the estimate. Now, if you need to make any adjustments to the amounts, you can do it now. And then up here, we have our customer. We have our, it's going to be shipped to the customer, name, address. And now this is complete. I want to create a purchase order. So I go up here again and click on Create Purchase Order. Our purchase orders, which are the forms that go to the supplier, once you create a purchase order from the estimate or sales order, all the pertinent information is filled in automatically with the exception of the price. Again, make sure your purchase order matches, purchase order number matches the PO number, the estimate number down here again. We're going to go up here, and if this hasn't already filled in, which it probably will from the 664 keyring since we entered a preferred vendor, but if not, or if you haven't entered the vendor, just go here, click on your vendor. It will populate the information right here automatically. We want to drop ship. We choose ABC Company. It automatically fills in this information for us. And we're complete. We can save and close. And then from here, you can add the imprint instructions and send the sales order to your customer for approval. And once you have the approval, your purchase order can go to your supplier. So we're all set. We're going to go back. Once you save and close on the purchase order, it's going to take you back to the sales order. And from there, I want to create an invoice. Now, obviously, this is not all done within 5 minutes of each other. Once you submit the sales order and the purchase order, your order is produced, and then you're going to get an invoice from the supplier. When you receive that, go to your purchase order and make sure, edit the data. This may be 106 key rings that you received. The freight you wouldn't have known prior to setting this up. So you enter all this data and make sure it matches your supplier's invoice. That's very important that you go back and edit your purchase order once you receive the supplier's invoice to make sure it matches. Because then when you pay the supplier in QuickBooks, that number will come up, that purchase order, and it'll save you a lot of time if it already matches. So now we're assuming we just got the supplier invoice. We've edited the purchase order to match it. And then we're going to go back to the sales order, and we're going to edit that. So it may be 106 key rings. We'll know what the freight is at that point. If there are any other charges we didn't remember to put in here, you can make any adjustments that you need. Once the sales order is all set, you'll go up here and hit Create Invoice. Now again, change the invoice number to match the purchase order number if you need to, and make any adjustments that you might want to do. You can send this off to your client, all ready to be paid. Now, the estimate, sales order, purchase order, and invoice screens, all of these that we've looked at, the estimate, sales order, purchase order, invoice, these are all entry screens. That's all they are. They're not what print or get emailed to customers or vendors. There's a box at the top of each one of these that says template with a drop-down box. There would be stock templates already loaded for each type of screen, and some may suit your needs and some may not. I've created my own over the years, and I've imported it into this sample company, this advertising spec that I call Advertising Specialty Invoice. Now, when I click on that, this is what I see. This is how I created it. And then when I email or print it, this is what is produced for my client, to go to my client. I'm very emphatic about making sure they know when it's due, how much is due. You can fill in all this information, that's not a problem. And I want them to know where to send the check. So I try to make it as clear as possible to send to my client. There is a great layout designer in QuickBooks for templates where you can design your own template. And that can include the custom fields like we were creating earlier. You can also import templates from other companies, or those you can import some posted on QuickBooks sites. Now, we are going to do a sales order for one client that involves two suppliers. Sometimes in our industry we have one order for a customer and it involves the two suppliers, two or more suppliers. Generally this involves blank goods that are ordered and shipped to a decorator, screen printer, or embroiderer. It could be an engraver. You know, there are quite a few situations in our industry. We really don't want to invoice the customer twice, one for each supplier. But how can you handle it, and how do we track this logically in QuickBooks? So let's look at this sample order. In this example, my client has ordered 12 pullover hooded sweatshirts from Alpha Shirt, and they're going to be embroidered elsewhere. All parts of the order, the sweatshirts, the embroidery, and the shipping, are included on the sales order. So we can bill the client for all of the order on just one invoice. Now the trick is getting the supplier purchase orders set in a logical way that saves us time and money, in a way that we can track these charges correctly. Now note, this is sales order 1302. And you know already I'm fanatical about carrying numbers and purchase orders forward. So I've got to figure out a way to make the two purchase orders reflect this number so that I can easily identify the sales order to which it belongs. From the sales order, I'm going to go up here and create a purchase order. And when I click on that, I'm going to get this box. The first one says create purchase order for all allowed items, and the second one says create purchase order for selected items. Generally, all aspects of an order are handled by one supplier. So in that case, you would click create purchase order for all allowed items. So that would be the key ring. That is, you purchase the key ring, it's screen charged or engraved, screen printed or engraved at Superb. That would be the first case. But in this case, we only want to create a purchase order for some of the items. And we want to create two purchase orders, one for Alpha Shirt and one for the embroiderer. So here we're going to click create purchase order for selected items. When we do that, then we click that and then click on OK. We're going to get this screen. We can click on the left-hand side which items we want on the purchase order. And you'll notice that I created the item for the sweatshirts as 695 HBM, small to extra large, and I have Alpha in the item name. I did this intentionally. I have a client who does lots of these orders. She might have some from Alpha, some from Bodic, some blank goods from TSC, all on the same purchase order. She might have some embroidered and some screen printed. It gets kind of complicated. So if I didn't include the supplier of blank goods in the item name and number, she would have a very difficult time trying to remember which items, from which supplier the items came from. So I wanted to make it easy for her to spot which items came from which supplier, so she'd only pick up one supplier on each purchase order. Now, if you've selected the preferred vendor, if you've entered that, then that's much easier. But some people don't do that, and you might not have a means of knowing if you've not entered the preferred vendor. And then there's another chance for an error. So here we're going to create a purchase order for Alpha Shirt, and I have clicked the sweatshirt item, and I've clicked shipping because Alpha is not doing the embroidery, they're just sending out blank goods. I'm going to click OK. By doing that, I have the purchase order here with only Alpha charges. The PO number, oh gosh, I hope y'all can see because I can't see on my screen. The PO number you give the purchase order is important, so it makes sense to you and you can find it as needed. Remember the sales order number was 1302. I have created this as 1302 Alpha. And this is the one, the portion that goes to Alpha. Notice that I am requesting that the ship to go directly to the embroiderer. The vendor is Alpha Shirt, and I only have the sweatshirt and the shipping here. Now I'm going to go back. This is ready to go into Alpha Shirt with whatever instructions. I'm going to go back to the sales order, and I'm going to create a purchase order again. I'm going to, again, create the purchase order for selected items. Click OK. And this time, I'm not going to click this one, the sweatshirt. This time, I'm only going to click the ones that are pertinent to stitch graphics, to the embroiderer. So here I'm going to click embroidery and shipping. And yes, we also checked shipping before. But here you just enter the shipping charges charged by the embroiderer. Click OK. And there's our one for Alpha. And here is our purchase order, standalone purchase order for Stitch Graphics. The vendor is Stitch Graphics. We're going to have them shipped directly to ABC Company. We have only the embroidery and the shipping and handling. Here I have created the purchase order number as 1302 Stitch. Make sure if you do this that you do it consistently, like even have a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or something so that the purchase orders for Alpha, you know, have the digits or the numbers of the purchase order and Alpha, or you could have the numbers in Stitch. Because if you go to the Find function on QuickBooks, if I just put in under purchase order Find 1302, it's not going to show up. It will only show up, I mean, I could scroll through all of my purchase orders, which is a pain, but it will come up immediately if I type in Find 1302 Stitch or 1302 Alpha. So just make sure you document what you've done so that you have it. So we've got two purchase orders here, standalone, one for the blank goods and one for the embroidery. Now, this should save you lots of time and keep you from having to manually separate this order. And it gives you a systematic way to track the order from both the customer and the supplier's sides. Now, I think I've introduced a ton of information to y'all, hoping to save you some time and money. I hope I haven't thrown too much at you. My goal was to give you some ideas as to what QuickBooks can do, even if you haven't followed exactly how to do it. You know that it can be done fairly quickly and easily. Knowing something cannot be done, also can or cannot be done, is half the battle. And that from there you can find a way to get it done. So I'll take some questions and answers in just a second. I'm hoping I've shown you some ways to save time and money. And I am on LinkedIn, and please connect with me, and I hope to hear from you. I have my contact information here for your convenience. Now I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Harriet. Okay, so I have the first question from Michael Kaufman, and he says, I have been using Account Edge Pro for years. We are in a Mac format. I've heard that QuickBooks for Mac has some problems. Is that, are you?
Okay. Oh, is that a question or just a statement?
I'm guessing he wants to know if you have used QuickBooks in a Mac environment and any.
I know that QuickBooks Mac is very different. I'm a QuickBooks Pro advisor, and I had to study that. I have not used Mac. From what I understand, it is different enough that someone who uses only Mac and is familiar with QuickBooks Mac is better suited for this. QuickBooks products, each one has something a little bit different, and I don't know whether it would have all of these features that would suit the sales order and purchase order, for instance. So I'm not very sure about that. I know similarly QuickBooks Online is very different, and they feature different aspects and abilities. So the answer is I'm not familiar with it, but I know it's different enough that it's a highly specialized QuickBooks.
Thank you, Harriet. The next question is from Joshua Perelman. I apologize if I don't pronounce your last name correctly, but it says, how do you handle a charge that you do that is value added that does not have a supplier? For example, shipping from your office to the customer when you have an account called shipping.
Read that to me again.
How do you handle a charge that you do that is value added that does not have a supplier? And then he gives an example. Shipping from your office to the customer when you have an account called shipping.
Oh, just adding it to the purchase order? Is that what you mean?
Joshua, no, to the invoice, he said.
Oh, to the invoice? You would just add a line item in there. It wouldn't be difficult to do. You would just go back in and add another item, a line item that says shipping or freight or whatever you want to do. And it doesn't matter. That's why we didn't put a vendor on there. But you can add that into the charge.
Thank you, Harriet. The next question is from Robert, and it says, we have an issue with some items being taxable at one rate, embellished garments, and other items at the regular tax rate. Is there a way to incorporate multiple tax rate items into the same invoice?
Well, now you're putting the tax rate. I'm going to have to think on that and play with it a little bit, because you put in one tax rate for the customer. I'm wondering, that's something I would have to play with and see if you could you might even have to create a second customer, but you can't have two customers on a purchase order. If he wants to contact me, we can sort of play with some thoughts with that. I have not run into that situation. It's not a problem if some of the items are taxable and some are not taxable, but it is a little bit tricky if they are at different tax rates. So that's something I'd have to mull over a little bit and play with. But please have him contact me.
Thank you, Harriet. The next question, just a side note, we will be able to distribute this presentation or webinar. So if you would be interested in receiving a copy of this webinar, we will try to distribute it to all who attended. And that was a question from Vivian Shu. But next to another question we have from Carrie. How can we create delivery receipt and/or packing lists from QuickBooks?
There is an option to do that, and I think it's in the preferences. And I'm not sure exactly which part of the preferences, but it is in the preferences somewhere because I've seen that. It's probably in, I'm not sure which portion of the preferences, but wander through the preferences and see if you can find it in there, because there are a lot of options in there. And I'm not sure whether it's a company or a individual preference, but I have seen it, so it is available.
Thank you, Harriet. And then we have a question from Vivian, and it says, is it correct that Pro version does not have SO, therefore cannot create POs?
Pro does not have sales orders, so you can create a template. When we looked at the templates, you can create a template that you have labeled as an estimate, and you can have it look like a sales order. So you can bypass it that way, but you do have to go in and create the template and the layout designer and put the fields that you want in there. So you can do that in Pro, but it's not automatic.
Thank you, Harriet. Joanne asked, instead of a sales order, I use a pending invoice to receive acknowledgments, and I use ABC for split vendors. Could you foresee a negative in this for the future? I'm
not totally sure what for a pending invoice. I've got that. Now ABC, what are we talking about with ABC?
Let's see.
What letters are they? Maybe I've just misunderstood the letters.
Let's see the question. Joanne, if you could please expand a bit on what you mean by ABC. But it says just the letters for split vendors. We're going to go to see if Joanne expands. Oh, she did. Same number, but A or B for the suppliers. For example, Alpha A, screen printer B. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So you're trying to, with doing a split order like we did there, you're trying to, you're using, instead of a sales order, you use a pending invoice. I got that. And then what was the second half of the question?
And then it says, and I use ABC for split vendors. And then it says, same number, but A or B for the suppliers. For example, Alpha A, screen printer B.
Okay. And what are you trying to create? For the purchase order? Is that what you're trying to create?
Let's see, Joanna, if you could please expand a little bit more. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I don't see any problems, but I can't predict. It's all a workaround, so it's a little tricky to see. The purchase orders and the sales orders in QuickBooks are non-posting, so they don't post until you actually pay a supplier, or if you're on a cash basis, or get paid by a customer. So what you do within the purchase orders and the sales orders you have a lot of flexibility, such as I did by titling it 1302 Alpha and 1302 Supplier. So you do have a lot of latitude in there. But I don't foresee any problems, but I'm not totally sure whether you would run into problems with that.
Okay, thank you, Harriet. Joanne did add to keep the same number file, if that helps towards the question, but she said thanks.
Oh.
Let's see.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, and then another question from Vivian. But there is no button to generate PO on the estimate screen, so enter PO manually.
On Pro? Are we back at Pro again?
Vivian, if you could please, let's see, yes, Vivian said.
There should be a button to create a purchase order. On the estimate screen? Oh, now that's interesting. You would have to, if there isn't a button, it depends on what version you're in. I've played with Pro some. I've always used Premier. But if there's not a button at the top or an icon at the top for you to create a purchase order, then yeah, you would have to go in and create the purchase order from there with the blank screen. But you'd have all the data entered in there. You'd have your vendor and your customer and your item number. So it wouldn't take you all that long.
Oh, thank you, Harriet. Vivian added correct. Only generate sales invoice. And she said, thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
There are no more questions. If there are any more questions, please enter them. But we are a bit over time. Harriet, if it's okay with you, we can take more questions. But for the remaining audience, if you do have questions but you can't think of it at the moment, Harriet will be able to, if you reach her, given the information that's on the webinar presentation, she will try to get back to you as soon as she's able to. And we appreciate everyone being able to be here. Harriet, would you like to add anything else?
I appreciate everybody coming. I hope it helped and save you some time and money here.
Thank you. Alrighty, but if that's all, then thank you everyone for attending, and we will make sure that we send the presentation to all that attended, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Terrific.
Thank you, Harriet.
Oh, thank you. So we're all set.